Hey everyone, and welcome back to Millennial Mind. This year, I've made sure that YouTube has been a huge priority for me, and I'm so happy that we've grown this community so quickly this year, and I'm super excited about where it's going to go. My goal for the end of the year is to hit 100,000 subscribers. And I'm so grateful to each and every one of you that has been part of this journey with me. So if you enjoy these episodes and want to hear more from me about how you can grow, don't forget to press the subscribe button so you never miss out on my new episodes. Some of your favorite topics are around relationships, neuroscience, therapy, but today I'm going to be doing a solo episode on self-growth. You usually hear me sit down with guests and ask them about their life and how they've grown and the challenges that they've had and how they've overcome them. But today it's time for me to share my own lessons. I've been on a journey of self discovery and self growth throughout the last few years. I'm still not perfect, I have a long way to go, but today I really want to talk about how I pushed myself in certain situations to grow and to change. Growth and self expansion have been something I've become obsessed with over the past few years. And every year I challenge myself with something that I thought I could absolutely never do. I never used to be a risk taker, but I've learned that in order for me to break through different parts of my life, I really need to start taking more risks. It means I need to let go of my limiting beliefs. It means I need to change my mindset. And it means that I need to do things that I'm truly uncomfortable with. Today, I'm going to be talking around all those different challenges and the one that most of you ask me, how and when and why did you quit your job? I promise you, this wasn't an easy decision. It also was the biggest risk I've ever taken, and it took me years to decide to actually do it. So if you want to know that more in detail, just wait till the end, because I'm going to go through that thoroughly. Before I get into some of the things that I've challenged myself to do, I really want to talk about why this is so important. And it is because, and this is going to sound crazy, but I've had a self realization that we are all robots. Okay? I know that sounds crazy. I know it sounds ridiculous, but hear me out. I, for the past few years, have been wanting to do certain things that I'm scared of, certain things that I'm nervous about. I've wondered how I can change certain characteristics about myself that I don't like. And I realize that every single thing that I do is just because my brain has been taught it. It's just because I've repeated this pattern. So, for example, if I no longer want to get annoyed about something, or I no longer want to be sensitive about something, or I no longer want to, I don't know, not say something in reaction to someone, it's just because my brain has learned to do it, which is why I'm doing it. So, what I'm trying to do with these challenges is decode my brain from just accepting the code that I've given it. This is going to make sense when I go through the challenges, but I really wanted to emphasize that point because what it shows us is that we can all change. And the reason why I want to talk about the fact that we can always change is because I hear so many people telling me, I'm just not X, which is why I can't do Y. Okay, number one was choosing to actually invest a lot of money in my business and my ideas. Now, this is a really difficult one because when I started my podcast, I started with a £50 mic. I started just recording the podcast through audio. I then moved on to platforms like Riverside and Zoom and all these different other virtual platforms. But the biggest and most single decision that totally changed the trajectory of my podcast and my life was investing into a studio. I'll tell you why for a couple of different reasons. And it's not for the most like, oh, it was aesthetic and all the rest of it. It's because I was actually spending money on doing this podcast. And therefore, I actually had to make sure that I was producing good content. Otherwise, it was a waste of time and a waste of money. What I mean by that is a lot of the time when we're trying to do something, we just think, oh, we'll just try it and we won't put too much skin in the game. The thing is when you invest in something, when you're spending money on something, you're spending time on something, when you're showing the world and actually putting effort into it, you've actually got skin in the game. So it wasn't just the fact of like, obviously a studio is like aesthetic, has better cameras, has better mics. My actual first three episodes when I did it in the studio, I was using the camera audio when I was uploading the podcast onto YouTube. I wasn't even using the mic audio, which is wild. And if you go on my YouTube right now, some of those views have more views than some of these episodes, which is crazy. But what I mean by that is it's not necessarily even about the fact that it was with a mic or in a studio or any of that. It was just because I was actually having better conversations because I was putting more effort into them at times because it was such a big deal that I was spending money. A lot of the time when I was recording virtually, one of the things I remember is I was super tired after work, or the guests were sometimes tired. And sometimes I just felt like my questioning wasn't that there because one, I wasn't with them in person. I feel like the energy in person compared to virtually is totally different. Two, I just was like, oh, if the episode is rubbish, then, I haven't really spent any money on it. It's not a big deal. back then I didn't have a brand, so it wasn't like I was like, oh, it's going to be really bad, so everyone's going to think I'm stupid. I was just like, okay, whatever, it's not a big deal. But then when I went into the studio, I felt like a professional, and therefore I had to act as a professional. So lesson one would be, whatever you're doing, put some skin in the game. Actually investing in yourself, actually investing in you and your ideas allows you to execute on them a lot more efficiently. You will want to make it the best if you've invested into it. And I think the people who are watching will also take you more seriously. So even though I was making zero money from the podcast, I was still in a full-time job. So it's not like I had all the time in the world to go to a studio and record. I still invested into a studio because I actually thought, you never know what's going to happen. And now I'm smiling thinking back on that, because I think, like, what if I never invested into a studio? Would I still be in my job? Would I be even doing this podcast right now? Would I just continued virtually? Would I have ever got here? I don't know. So I would say pushing myself to get a studio and see if it would enhance my podcast was actually the best thing that I ever did. It was scary. It was uncomfortable. I had never ever done this before. This was also the first time that I was investing a big chunk of money in my passion and my hobby at the time. But I think it paid off. So tip number one would be invest in yourself. Okay, and number two that has really pushed me in a new direction is doing international podcasts. So this actually came out very, very, very randomly. I was going to my cousin's wedding in India, and when we booked our flights, I was still in my full-time job. Now, in order for me to make sure that when I was going to India, I was going to use my time wisely, I wanted to do a podcast season there. Now, I know that sounds a bit ridiculous. Why couldn't I just go to India and enjoy my time? But when I say at this point, I was obsessed with my podcast, I was obsessed with the podcast. I booked the flight, I think it was in the summer before when the podcast was doing quite well. And I felt like if I was going to India and I was going for 10 days, the wedding was only 4 days. What was I going to do for the rest of the 6 days? And I really, really, really wanted to interview some people in Mumbai. And I just thought, let me do it. So at this point, I had booked a week and a half trip. I hadn't got any guests, but it was something that I wanted to do. And I think maybe a month or 2 months before, I started reaching out randomly to people. Now, this was actually a really interesting thing that I did because it completely changed so much for me. One of my most viral, I think the most viral video on my channel is from Malvika, and I recorded that episode. I think it was on my first or second day. I can't remember, maybe even my first day in Mumbai after the wedding, where I was so tired. And if you watch those episodes, the one with Gauranga Das and the one with Malvika, my voice is so croaky, I look exhausted, and that is because I am. So I did the Mumbai season. It actually opened me up to lots of people in India. So hi, if you're from India. And also it really allowed me to see that, wow, I can go to any country and record a podcast. All you need is a film crew, or you need a studio, which they didn't have in Mumbai. So I hired an entire film crew. And you need literally a place to record the podcast. Now I recorded at the Taj in Mumbai, which is where I was staying. It was super nice because I literally just recorded in the living room of the room. I stayed in the most insane room there. And so I was just recording a podcast there. It was super flexible, super easy. The crew actually spoke Hindi, and I can understand Hindi, but I speak Gujarati. So it was a little bit tricky at times to communicate with them, but it was so much fun. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed that trip. So much so that I made a promise to myself that every year I record an international podcast series. So this year I went to New York and I recorded there in a studio called Gotham Studios, which was also super fun. Now there are pros and cons to both. Okay, obviously the pros of recording in a hotel are it's super convenient, it's really easy. If people cancel, it's not the end of the world. If people want to change their time or if they're late, it's not so crazy. You can kind of keep everybody a little bit delayed. The cons, though, are you have zero boundaries. You're in the same environment. You literally never leave the room because I was obviously sleeping there, waking up there, doing a podcast there, having the breaks there, because by the time the hotel was so big, by the time I went downstairs and came back up, there just wasn't enough time. I was eating breakfast there, just everything was in the room, so that's a huge con. And then the other thing is obviously I don't think the quality of the sound is always as good as in a studio because the room's not soundproof. So, people would sometimes knock on the door, or we'd sometimes forget to put do not disturb on, and so you would have a lot more, I guess, interruptions. The other thing is that obviously you're more comfortable in a hotel. So a lot of people would come a little bit later or come stay later or whatever. And it was just difficult to kind of manage that at times. So the pros of recording in a studio are obviously super professional, amazing quality. You don't have to worry about any of the like mic, the sound, any of that stuff. You know, you're making sure that you're going to a different environment. It kind of feels like you're going to work. It's quite nice. The cons of recording in a studio though are it's super expensive. You are very rigid on time. And if somebody cancels or somebody's late, it's not the studio's fault. They have another booking. They cannot delay you. So the flexibility of being in a hotel room, I think is better over a studio. However, I think if you can get a studio, you just go in and record, you don't have to worry about anything else. You're kind of going into a different environment. It's also quite nice. The good thing as well about New York was it felt so easy. After Mumbai, I came back and I was exhausted. I did not get any time to relax on that trip. I basically went straight from my cousin's wedding into recording 16 episodes in 4 days, then flew straight back to London because I was so tired. In New York, though, I got there 3 days before, so had the whole weekend in New York to kind of chill and relax. Well, the studios only open Monday to Friday, 10 to 6, which meant that I could only record 3 episodes a day. And the thing about the studio is I had to pre-book, and if this, a lot of the timings were filled up, so I couldn't just randomly get people in. So it kind of made sure that I had good boundaries. So the reason why these international podcasts have really helped me grow is Mumbai showed me that I could literally make this podcast global. Doing it in New York when we realized that I can build a different audience in a different country. And who knows, while recording a podcast next year. But every year I promised myself I'm going to be going to a new country, recording a brand new series and connecting with more of you around the world. Okay, number three, and this is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, is going to a retreat at LifeCo. Now, hear me out. It was probably one of the best things I've ever done, but it was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done. I went to a retreat called the LifeCo in Bodrum, where for 7 days I could not have any processed food, any sugar, any caffeine, any nonsense in my body, not alcohol, nothing. So I went on the mental wellness program, which is basically where you have 3 meals a day, you have 2 snacks, and you do all of these incredible activities as well. Now, my mum and my massie also came and they went on the green juice and salad program, which meant that in the morning they would have a juice, and then another juice at like 10 o'clock, and then they'd have a salad for lunch, another juice in the afternoon, and then a salad for dinner. Now, the great thing about the Life Co is that you go there and it's all personalized to you. So when we got there, we all had our bodies checked. You know, we had to go to see a doctor, we had to do loads of tests. I had to do loads of blood tests. Basically, I was told that I need to actually put on a bit of weight because I was a little bit underweight. And therefore, I had to make sure that I was eating very, very well. The problem is that my diet is, I would say, balanced, but I would say it's filled with lots of junk food and lots of processed food. So I went from eating and drinking things like Coke Zero, coffee, matcha, Fanta. I love all these things, to having water and there's detox tea and like some green juices, and it was a huge shock to my body. So I know that sounds crazy, but like I didn't have bread, I didn't have rice, I didn't have pizza, I didn't have pasta, nothing. It was genuinely 3 really healthy meals a day, which was lovely, and I really enjoyed it. But it was a huge shock to my body. What that showed me is I have way too much processed food in my life. I've just noticed how tired I was. So the first day when you get there, you basically do all of these different checks. And I'm not joking, every appointment on that day, I couldn't even vlog on those days because I was so tired. I would go to the appointment and I would genuinely fall asleep. I would go to the appointment where they would did like put these tests on my brain, fell asleep. Went for a massage, fell asleep. Literally did a private meditation, fell asleep. I was genuinely so tired and I realized my body is running off caffeine and sugar. And the second that I detracted that out of my diet, I was exhausted. I couldn't think straight. And I was really struggling. I was moody, I was frustrated, I was angry, I was agitated, and I realized I'm addicted to these things. So going to that retreat was the best thing I've ever done, but it pushed me so much to realize how much I'm damaging my body by eating all of this junk. I would honestly recommend going to something like the Life Co if you're someone who is looking to feel better, look better, and also just have more energy. I feel like I never realized how much I was reliant on those things. I just thought it was kind of normal to drink 2, 3 coffees a day, have a matcha, have a Coke Zero. And I think it's not about going there and realizing, oh my God, my diet is so bad. It's about having that perspective on the things that you truly need. I love Coke Zero. I will never ever give it up. I will drink it till the day that I die. but I don't need to have it every single day. I want to talk about the biggest part of the retreat, and this is my fourth point because it's something that I've done out of controlled environment. So the retreat was amazing because obviously I was there, you didn't really need the resort. At night, we went to do like some shopping by the beach, and obviously, you could have whatever you wanted. There wasn't a camera on us, but no one was. I was never going to have a Coke Zero or a coffee or a tea or anything like that. I'd gone there with a purpose. The thing about me is I like to be intentional. So when I went to the retreat, I was like, if I'm going to detox myself, I'm going to detox myself hard. I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to have anything. If I'm tempted, I'm just going to have to get over it. And I just was very, very disciplined in the things that I thought would be very difficult. So what the retreat really did was push me to see how much I was pushing my body. I was running off caffeine and I didn't even realize how tired I was, how much my body needed to rest, how clogged up my mind was because I just detoxed so much. And I'm not joking, so many ideas came to me. And it leads on to my next point about one of the hardest things I think I've ever done is give up coffee. This retreat was honestly so transformational to the way that I was feeling that I thought when I came back, I was like, why don't I just not have coffee for the weekend? I got back on Saturday at about 4:35 a.m. in the morning. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna have coffee and I'm gonna go straight into work. I'm just gonna stay up. But when I got back, I was so tired. I was like, I'm just gonna rest. And I did rest. And that day I had to go out. So I rested, I went out, I came home, I slept early. I was kind of fine. Sunday, I was like, you know what? I didn't have coffee for the last 7 days when I woke up. I don't need to have it again today. So I just said to myself, I'm just not going to have it today. It was never my intention when I came back to actually completely give up coffee. I just said I'm only going to have one a day. But I have done this before where I've done a juice cleanse and I did it with press, which was also amazing for 2 days. And I just said after that, I'm going to only have one coffee a day. And what happens is I'll have one and then the afternoon will come and I'll have another. That night I won't sleep very well. So then the next night I'll end up having three. That night I won't sleep well. And basically it's just a cycle that happens for years and years and years. And this is why I was so exhausted and so tired. I honestly felt on a retreat that I was kind of drugged, and that's why I realized, like, oh my God, there is something that I seriously need to change. So on Monday, I said to myself, why don't I just see if this week I have decaf coffee and I have matcha and tea and Coke Zero if I want to, because, like I said, I'll never got Coke Zero, but I would still have caffeine in my life. I just won't have a coffee. Now, again, I'm not joking. For that entire week, I felt like I was a zombie. I genuinely felt so tired. But what that did was open up my eyes to see that I'm not actually cutting out caffeine. I've just cut out coffee and I still feel this bad. It was actually ridiculous how much I was relying on it. So I didn't release a podcast. I still recorded 3 podcasts in that week. I didn't release any, which means I didn't do any editing or cutting of clips or reviewing or any of that. I allowed myself to wean off this coffee addiction because I realized if I'm not even giving up caffeine and I'm this tired, imagine what would happen if I totally gave up caffeine. Also, I don't think it's normal to be functioning on this much caffeine, and therefore I had to do something about it. I don't know about you, but I always feel like when I meet somebody and they tell me about their journey, I guess that's what I'm trying to kind of do with this podcast. It allows me to really understand the mistakes that I'm making in my life. And I think so often, and one of the biggest reasons why I do this podcast, is I don't think that we should wait until we're like 100 years old to have regrets and to have all of these things that we're like, oh, I wish I did this, or like, oh, I wish someone told me, because there's so much information on the internet right now, and there's so much information if you actually talk to people that you can learn. So, what I mean by that is on this retreat, I met this lovely girl, and she was basically telling me about how she, in her 20s, survived off caffeine and sugar, and even her early 30s, and she developed an autoimmune disease, which made her super unwell, made her have all of these different conditions, which I won't go into. But it honestly made me realize that I will run my body to the ground if I keep having this much caffeine. If I cannot survive without coffee in my diet, what on earth am I doing? It's not like I'm giving up everything. So that week, when I came back, I just gave myself that grace. Like I said, I didn't do a million different things. And now, everyone, I haven't had a coffee for nearly a month. I haven't had like a real caffeinated coffee. I'm still having decaf. I'm still having matcha. I'm still having Coke Zero. God forbid if I had to ever give up caffeine. What on earth would I do? When you're pregnant, I think you have to give up caffeine. I have no idea what I will do. I don't know how people survive. I don't know how people function without caffeine, if I'm completely honest. But I'm just really happy that I pushed myself to not have caffeinated coffee. And that might not seem like a big deal, But trust me, if you are someone who out there who drinks coffee like 3 times a day, like I did, I think you'll get it. If you're someone who doesn't drink coffee, honestly, congratulations to you. Let's do a blood transfusion. Let me live your life because I have no clue how you're doing it. I will say I'm very jealous of you. Keep not having it happen because you are honestly just don't know how you function. Okay, now my last one, which I promised you all I would tell you in detail, was how and why I quit my job and why this was the best decision I've ever taken in my entire life. The hardest decision I ever had to make was the decision of should I quit my job and actually try believing in myself for 6 months? That sounds crazy, doesn't it? So many of us, and I've talked about this so many times, will not take a bet on ourselves, but will take a bet on other people, right? So many of us will think, and I kind of linked to my first point, I can't invest in myself, but of course I'll invest in jewelry or a handbag or a house or something like that. But to invest in myself in an idea that I believe in, no. So I've talked about this in some of my other episodes, but I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail today about when I decided to quit my job. If you listen to my podcast, you'll hear that the reason that I quit my job was because I really believed that this podcast was kind of getting somewhere and all I needed was more time. I was working a corporate job. I used up all my holidays to record these podcasts in person. I was finally seeing some growth across all platforms. And I thought, if I don't give myself a chance now, when will I ever? So many of us say to ourselves, I will do this when. And especially as an Indian girl, that when is always when you get married. When you're married, you can travel. When you're married, you can do this. When you're married and you're settled, that's when you can quit your job and do your podcast. And I was like, it's never going to happen. If I don't do it now, how will I do it then? I had no responsibilities in my life. I was living at home with my family. I was in a relationship with Nicole, obviously. But, we weren't engaged, we weren't married, we weren't looking to buy a house. So we didn't have any pressure on our heads about income necessarily. And I was in a very fortunate position to be there, by the way. But what I was saying to myself was, I have savings. I can do this for maybe 6 months. And if it doesn't work out, cool. I've lost 6 months of savings, which is obviously a big deal. And by the way, if you come from an Indian family, you know it's a big deal. One of the best things that I learned was if you don't make a big decision, what is the worst that's going to happen? And often, my natural body reaction would be like, well, I just can't do it because what if something happened? And it's like, what's that thing? Are you going to die? What's going to happen? And I realized I wasn't going to die. I had a year's worth of savings. And if I just lost 6 months worth of savings, I was like, I'm confident I can get another job. I said to myself, if this doesn't work out, that money that I saved up for 6 months, what it will mean is I just have to buy a house later. What it means, I can't probably go on holiday for a few years. What it means is I can't buy the things that I want to buy for a few years. It's not necessarily about having the money or not. It's like, are you using it wisely? But what does wisely mean? Going on holiday, is that more wise than investing in yourself? Going to buy a fancy handbag, is that more wise than getting like a coaching call with someone? I don't know. Everyone has different things that they want to spend money on. But what I realized was like I have to spend money on myself. So I think making that decision about what is my priority right now is my priority investing in myself, investing in my business. And that doesn't have to actually mean, taking the big risk and quitting a job. It could mean investing into a business course. It could mean investing into coaching. It could be investing into a membership. It could be investing into anything. If health is your priority and you want to get a PT, you've got to ask yourself, is that worth my investment? Or is it worth me going on holiday at the moment? Or am I spending money on furniture? Or am I spending money on clothes or shoes or whatever it is? For me, I knew I had to, at that time, take that risk. And I will say that it's not an easy decision. I had a lot of people that were against me and a lot of people that told me it wasn't going to happen. I actually was told so many times that, there's nothing special about you. There's so many people out there doing a podcast. And I think especially now, there are even more people doing a podcast. And I think one of the things is, and I truly believe this, is that there is nothing special about me. It's just the fact that I was worked really, really hard. And I think my whole messaging from anything that I do is if I can do it, you can do it too. And I think that's the key thing about these 5 things that I've pushed myself to do and challenged myself to do is that so often we are the own limits to our own choices. So often we don't do things because our perspective is our prison. But actually, if you push yourself, you never know what's going to happen. You never know how it's going to transform you. You never know how it's going to change your life. And that's literally what quitting the job did for me. I never ever believed for a second that I would be able to do this full time or live this life or have all the incredible opportunities and experiences that I have to this day. And it all stemmed from taking that one chance, that one risk, and pushing myself to believe that I deserve better for my life than to do something that I don't enjoy. So If you want to know more about how I quit my job and the exact details, let me know. I can film an entire video on that. If you want me to, I could talk for England on that. But I just wanted to share why these 5 challenges, and especially the last one, have completely changed my life. These were my top 5 challenges. Obviously, there's loads more that I could have talked about, but let me know if any of them resonated with you or if you want me to dive deeper into any of these. And I would also love to know any of the challenges that have really helped you learn and grow within yourself, because I feel like we can all learn from each other. And like I said, that girl who gave me that story at the retreat, I want to know the stories from everyone in my community. So thank you so much for watching and listening to this solo episode. I promised you that I was going to do one every single month. That's another challenge that I'm setting myself. But let me know what topics you want me to cover next time. And please, please, please don't forget to subscribe.